I'd like to really invite you to tell us about what works for you at the moment. And perhaps I'd like to start with you, with David Garrett from Summit Entertainment. Perhaps it would be apposite for you to give us a brief narrative of the triumph that you've had with the Stephenie Meyer's franchise of movies, how this came about, the element of potluck, the element of business vision, and what enabled you to actually cover the risk of negative costs and then back it up with pre-sales internationally, which I think included self-distribution in the US. So an independent triumph, in other words.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I would preface anything I say about Twilight. It is, it's a phenomenon. So it's probably not representative. It's representative of the life we'd all like to experience. But it reminds me a little bit of the episode of South Park. I don't know if anybody saw the episode where Cartman encourages everyone to buy a new hybrid car called a Pius. And there's a terrible cloud of smog hanging over the town. I don't want you, if I tell you the story, I don't want you to think there's a little sort of cloud of smog hanging over the auditorium, because there's a lot of luck involved in all of this. And I think probably in any creative business, it's about trying to do your most to put yourself in a position where when luck comes along you can take advantage of it. And that's really probably what I would say about the story of Twilight, is that we managed to be in a position when it came along to take best advantage of it. Summit, for those of you who don't know so much about the company, we're actually a bit like the hybrid Pius car, in that we are a vertically integrated mini studio, I suppose. Domestically, we develop, we produce, we finance our own pictures, and we distribute through our own distribution system in the US. But then we license the international rights territory by territory around the world in what the Americans call foreign. So in a way, our structure is most similar to what New Line used to be in the days when New Line was operating as a separate unit. Although New Line was owned by Warner Brothers, we are completely independent and privately financed. In the case of Twilight, this was something we acquired very early on in our life, in our new incarnation as a mini studio. And it was a project that was actually in turnaround. It was actually optioned by MTV Pictures, which is part of Paramount. And they'd been developing the project for about 18 months. And it was coming up to the end of their option. And Stephenie Meyer really didn't like the way, and this is, I have to say, one perspective of the story. I'm sure everyone involved will tell you something slightly different, but my own understanding is that Stephenie Meyer was not happy with the way the MTV Paramount script was going and didn't want to renew. So the books, which at that stage, the first two books had come out and were doing pretty well. They were kind of hovering around close to the bestseller list, but not a spectacular success at that point. The third book hadn't come out. We got the book, knew the option was up for grabs, and decided, really, I remember the conversation. We decided this looked like a good story for the teen market, and everyone's looking for a good story for the teen market, particularly the teen female market, and this seemed a pretty decent original idea. I don't think anybody was jumping up and down saying this is the Holy Grail, but we just thought it was a great story and wanted to develop it. It then took us 5 months to actually persuade Stephenie Meyer, who is not she's very smart and not the easiest person to negotiate with. We had to firstly find a director, who we found in the shape of Catherine Hardwicke, and I was actually one of two people in LA when Catherine came into our office and pitched to us, and Catherine was herself obsessed with the Twilight series of books and had read them all, had gone to Forks and actually spent 2 weeks photographing the entire environment and came to our office with this books filled with photographs. She was completely a woman on a mission and said, I have to make this movie. So when she pitched to us, she seemed like the right person to do this. And she then took her enthusiasm to Stephanie Meyer. But we then had to find a writer. So we went through a succession of different writers looking at their angle on the story. And in the end, actually what was patently apparent is that Stephanie Meyer wanted someone who was going to stay very faithful, not just to the text, but the spirit of her story. So it wasn't until we had got both a director and a writer on board, 5 months later, Stephanie Meyer actually agreed to let us option the rights to the first book, and only the first book. The rights to all the other books were frozen. It meant that no one else could actually go ahead and make any of the other movies, but we did not have the rights to anything other than the first book when we went into production.
So at what point were you able to acquire the rights to the other two?
It was really up against the wire. We signed a deal for the next two books. That's for those of you who know the books, New Moon and Eclipse, coming to a theatre near you soon. We signed the rights to the second two books 1 week before the opening of Twilight in cinemas in the US, which was only when she was absolutely certain that she was happy with it and that it looked like it was going to be a success. But basically, the books only really became a phenomenon as we were going into production when the third book came out. And actually, it's interesting because Harry Potter really only took off as a literary phenomenon, if you can call it that, when the third book came out. And the same thing happened. We were very lucky. The same thing happened with the book, but only in the US, not internationally. The book was fairly well known in Germany. I remember very early on when we did pick up the rights to the book to make it into film, I went for a meeting at Little Brown in the UK in London, full of enthusiasm. They've got lovely offices, by the way, and I sat down with them and said, you really need to focus on this. We're going to make a film. It's going to be great. And they all sat there saying, well, it's been really difficult in the UK. We've only sold 40,000 copies. And, we tried to get Stephanie Meyer. She came over once, but it's not really doing very much. And consequently, the conversation ended there for about 9 months. And they really, really didn't have any idea what effect the film would have on the book, and to some extent vice versa, until very close to the UK release. And it went, in the last few months, it was suddenly selling 40,000, 50,000 copies a month as opposed to 40,000 over 2 years. And the month after the film came out, I think they sold 500,000 copies of the book. So there became a kind of synergy between the book and the film after a while. But internationally, it was not a book that was well known. But with the release of the film, the book took off, and then it created this extraordinary phenomenon that is the film.